He rejected the village girl without mercy. But when he saw her again, doing the one thing he never expected, Alexander Reed was a man of power and precision. As the CEO of a multinational corporation, he was used to fast deals, spotless contracts, and relationships that never touched his heart. Love, for him, was just another transaction, until his grandfather threw a wrench into his perfect, predictable life. At the family estate, during a rare visit, Alexander listened with growing disbelief as his aging grandfather, William Reed, announced his final wish. "Before I leave this world, I want to see you married, Alexander, to someone real, someone untouched by the greed of the city." And as if fate was laughing at him, William pointed toward a shy girl standing awkwardly by the garden gate, a girl in a simple cotton dress with sun-kissed hair and hands roughened from work. Her name was Emma Carter, a local girl whose family had lived in the nearby village for generations. "Her?" Alexander said, almost laughing. "Grandfather, be serious. I can't marry her." Emma heard him, and her cheeks flushed a deep, painful red. But she said nothing. She simply lowered her gaze, shrugged softly, and sat down on a bench under the apple tree, pulling out a small sandwich from her basket. Alexander watched her from afar, how she ate without any self-consciousness, smiling faintly at the taste of fresh bread and cheese, as if it was the finest meal in the world. There was no anger in her, no hurt pride, no demands, just peace. For the first time in years, Alexander felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. The city lights usually sang him to rest, but here in the quiet countryside, only the whispers of the wind and the distant hoot of an owl kept him company. He kept seeing her face, not glamorous, not polished, but genuine, and that tiny smile as she savoured her simple meal haunted him more than the eyes of any model he'd ever dated. At breakfast the next morning, his grandfather struck again. "If you refuse, Alexander, I will change my will. Everything, the company, the estate, the fortune, will go elsewhere." Alexander almost dropped his coffee cup. "You're blackmailing me with inheritance," he said through gritted teeth. William chuckled. "Call it tough love." Alexander's mind raced. Marriage to a village girl. For a year, maybe. It was absurd. And yet, walking away from the company he built and bled for, that was even more unthinkable. "Fine," he said at last, his voice clipped. "I'll marry her, but it's a formality. A name on paper, nothing more." William's eyes twinkled. "We'll see." Later that afternoon, Alexander found Emma sitting beneath the same apple tree, nibbling on a slice of pie this time, a small book open on her lap. She looked up as he approached, her eyes clear and patient. He cleared his throat. "Miss Carter," he said stiffly, "would you agree to marry me?" Emma blinked once, then twice. "Only if you want to," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for anything." That answer, so free of manipulation, so shockingly sincere, shook Alexander more than he cared to admit. The wedding was small, almost painfully simple. No grand ballroom, no designer gowns, no glittering champagne towers. Just the village chapel, a few witnesses, and a golden band that slipped onto Emma's finger as easily as if it had always been meant to be there. Alexander wore a tailored suit, of course. He couldn't bear to abandon all formality. But even that felt almost ridiculous standing next to Emma in her modest white dress, handmade by her mother. There were no elaborate vows, no breathless declarations of eternal love, only the quiet promise of responsibility from Alexander and the soft nod from Emma, accepting her place at his side without demands, without expectations. Afterward, as they rode back to the estate in silence, Alexander stole a glance at her. She sat straight, hands folded in her lap, looking out the window at the fields rolling by. "You don't have to pretend to be happy," he said gruffly. Emma turned to him, her expression calm. "I'm not pretending anything," she said. "I know what this is, and I'm grateful." Grateful. Alexander almost scoffed. She should be furious. She should be weeping, cursing him for dragging her into a marriage without love. But here she was, serene, composed, accepting. It unsettled him more than any tantrum would have. When they reached the estate, Emma simply picked up her small bag and followed him inside. No questions about luxury, no awe at the sprawling rooms or the priceless art on the walls. She settled into a guest bedroom without complaint, unpacking her few clothes into the massive wardrobe as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Alexander watched her from the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, feeling an unfamiliar tightness growing inside him. He had married her out of duty. He had promised himself he would never get involved. And yet, seeing her so quietly stitching her new life together, a dangerous thought crept into his mind. What if I've made a mistake by keeping my heart locked away? The first days of their marriage passed like a quiet truce. Alexander buried himself in work, spending long hours in his home office, while Emma kept to herself, helping the housekeeper, tending the garden, and walking the fields in the golden afternoons. There were no arguments, no icy glares, only a careful, polite distance. Exactly what he had wanted, or so he thought. One evening, returning from a particularly exhausting conference call, Alexander wandered into the kitchen, drawn by an unexpected aroma. There, standing by the old oak table, was Emma. Sleeves rolled up, cheeks flushed, stirring a pot on the stove. She looked up at him and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't demand anything, didn't expect praise, just simple happiness. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "The housekeeper said you usually skip dinner. I thought maybe you shouldn't." Alexander stared at her, oddly speechless. No one in years had worried about something so trivial as whether he had eaten. She placed a bowl in front of him, a hearty stew, rustic and rich, nothing fancy. He sat down without a word, picked up the spoon and took a bite, and for a moment, the weight of his entire empire slipped from his shoulders. The food was warm, comforting, real, just like her. Emma sat across from him, eating her own bowl without ceremony, humming a little tune under her breath. She wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't waiting for his approval. She was simply living. And somehow, in that small kitchen, under the soft light of the old chandelier, Alexander felt the first crack forming in the wall he had built around his heart. The next morning, Alexander found himself lingering at breakfast, something he never did. He usually grabbed a quick coffee before diving into endless meetings, but today he sat at the heavy wooden table, absent-mindedly stirring his cup, stealing glances at Emma as she moved around the kitchen. She wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, her hair braided loosely down her back. There was no makeup, no jewelry, and yet she looked more radiant than any woman he had ever known. "You don't have to cook for me," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Emma shrugged with a small, knowing smile. "I know. I want to." She placed a plate of warm toast and fresh strawberries in front of him, and as she did, her fingers brushed his hand. A feather-light touch, accidental, fleeting. It should have meant nothing, but the shock of it jolted through Alexander like electricity. He looked up sharply, and for a heartbeat, their eyes locked, his guarded and confused, hers steady and gentle. Emma quickly pulled back, pretending not to notice the tension, but Alexander couldn't move for a moment. His hand tingled where she had touched him. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice lower, almost strained. Emma only smiled again, that same serene, disarming smile, and returned to pouring tea, leaving him to wrestle with the storm she had unintentionally unleashed inside him. As he sat there, watching her move through the morning light, Alexander realized something deeply unsettling. He was beginning to want her smile. He was beginning to need her nearness, and he had no idea how to stop it. Later that week, the village held its annual harvest festival. A simple, lively affair filled with music, dancing, and the scent of roasted apples and fresh bread in the air. Alexander hadn't planned to attend. Such rustic celebrations were beneath his attention. Yet, somehow he found himself walking beside Emma down the winding dirt path leading to the village square, hands in his pockets, feeling strangely nervous. The festival was in full swing, children chasing each other with colourful ribbons, couples laughing as they danced barefoot on the grass, vendors calling out to sell their homemade jams and crafts. Emma's face lit up with childlike wonder, and Alexander found himself smiling despite himself. "Emma, over here," a young man from the village called out, waving eagerly. Emma smiled warmly and hurried over to greet him. Alexander followed slowly, feeling an odd, unwelcome tightness in his chest. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy grin that made the girls around giggle. He picked Emma up in a playful hug, spinning her once before setting her down with a laugh. Alexander's jaw clenched. "This is Liam," Emma said, turning to him. "We grew up together. He's like a brother to me." Liam extended a hand, but Alexander barely shook it, offering only a curt nod. "Pleasure," he said, though it felt anything but. As Liam chatted with Emma, Alexander stood stiffly by her side, feeling completely out of place. Every laugh they shared, every memory they recalled, dug deeper into him like a splinter. He didn't understand it. This marriage was supposed to be practical, detached. He wasn't supposed to care. Yet watching another man make Emma laugh so freely stirred something fierce and primal inside him, something dangerously close to jealousy. And for the first time, Alexander realized, maybe he wasn't just falling for her gentle smile and simple kindness. Maybe he was already lost. As the festival wore on, Emma noticed something strange. Alexander, who usually carried himself like an untouchable king, stayed close to her side, almost too close. When Liam suggested she try the apple-throwing contest, Alexander had immediately volunteered to partner with her, claiming it would be more efficient. When an old woman insisted Emma dance in the circle with the others, Alexander refused to let her go alone, offering her his arm with a stiff, awkward formality that somehow melted into something tender when she shyly accepted. Emma wasn't blind. She saw the way his hand lingered a fraction longer on her waist. She caught the way his eyes softened whenever she laughed, and more than anything, she felt the silent, invisible thread pulling them closer. A thread he didn't seem ready to acknowledge but couldn't quite sever either. Later, as twilight painted the sky in purples and golds, they found themselves standing at the edge of a hill, looking down at the village lights. The warm breeze played with Emma's hair, and without thinking, Alexander reached out, gently tucking a loose strand behind her ear. His fingers brushed her skin, deliberate this time, not accidental, and Emma's heart stumbled in her chest. "You belong here," Alexander said quietly, his voice low, almost reverent. Emma turned to look at him, surprised by the rawness she saw in his eyes. "And you?" she asked softly. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice almost too quiet to hear, "I don't know anymore." They stood there in silence, two souls caught between two worlds, the growing tension between them crackling like a hidden flame. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling shy, unsure. She hadn't asked for his heart. She hadn't even dared to hope for it. But maybe, just maybe, it was already starting to find its way to her. The next morning, the estate felt strangely different. It wasn't the way the sun streamed warmer through the windows, or how the birdsong outside seemed sweeter. It was something unspoken between Emma and Alexander, a new tenderness too fragile to name. Over breakfast, Alexander found excuses to stay longer at the table. He asked Emma about the books she liked, about the flowers she planted near the porch, about the festivals she loved as a child. Emma answered quietly, smiling. But inside, a storm was brewing. It was too easy to fall into this dream where Alexander Reed, the man who once thought her beneath him, now looked at her like she was something precious. But what if it wasn't real? What if it was just pity, guilt, a passing fascination he would eventually tire of? After all, he hadn't married her for love. He had married her for obligation. Emma excused herself early, claiming she needed fresh air, and wandered to the garden. The autumn roses were still in bloom, stubborn against the cooling winds, and she busied herself trimming dead leaves, trying to silence the ache in her chest. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She didn't have to turn to know it was him. "Are you avoiding me?" Alexander asked, his voice unusually gentle. Emma shook her head, blinking hard to keep the tears at bay. "No," she lied. "I just needed some air." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Emma," he said, and the way he spoke her name, carefully, almost reverently, made her heart crack a little more. "You don't have to pretend for me," she whispered, unable to hold it in any longer. "I know what this is. You don't owe me kindness." For a long moment, there was only silence between them, thick, charged, aching. Then Alexander did something he had never done before. He reached out and took her hand in his, large, firm, steady. "Maybe it's not about owing," he said quietly. "Maybe it's about wanting." Emma's breath caught. The walls she had so carefully built inside her began to tremble. And for the first time, she dared to hope. Maybe this wasn't just an illusion after all. Just as the fragile thread between them began to strengthen, reality came crashing back. It happened 3 days later. A sleek black car rolled up the gravel driveway, polished until it shone like a mirror. Emma stood on the front steps, wiping her hands on her apron after tending to the garden. When the driver opened the door and a tall, glamorous woman stepped out. Her name was Vanessa Hart, Alexander's former fiancée, a woman from his world, a woman perfectly sculpted for the flash and ruthlessness of the city. Vanessa spotted Emma immediately, and the smile that spread across her painted lips was thin and sharp. "You must be the little country bride," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. Emma opened her mouth, unsure what to say, but before she could find the words, Alexander appeared at the door behind her. His face tightened at the sight of Vanessa. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, stepping instinctively between the two women. Vanessa's smile widened, sensing weakness. "Relax, darling. I came to talk. Surely you haven't forgotten everything so quickly." Emma felt like an outsider, like a child who had wandered into a room full of secrets she wasn't meant to hear. Her heart twisted painfully. She didn't belong in his world. She never had. "I'll leave you two alone," Emma whispered, backing away before Alexander could stop her. She walked blindly toward the fields, the cold wind biting at her skin, her chest tight with hurt. Behind her, she heard Alexander call her name, once, then again, more urgently, but she didn't turn back. In that moment, every fear she had fought so hard to bury came roaring back. He would never truly be hers, not when he still had a world and a woman he had once chosen over everything else, and perhaps she had been a fool to believe she could ever be enough. Alexander watched Emma's retreating figure, a sinking feeling gnawing at his gut. "Emma, wait!" he called. But the words were swallowed by the wind. She was already too far, slipping away from him, and it was his fault. Behind him, Vanessa's voice dripped with false concern. "Poor thing," she said. "Surely you didn't think playing house with a village girl would fix what's broken inside you, Alex." He turned to her, his jaw tight. "Leave." Vanessa laughed lightly, unbothered. "Oh, Alex, you belong in my world, not here playing farmer. You're wasting yourself." She stepped closer, placing a manicured hand on his chest. "Come back with me. We could still have everything we planned. Power, prestige, real life." Alexander stared at her, feeling nothing. Not the pull of ambition, not the ache of lost love. Only a hollow emptiness where those things used to live. Because somewhere along the way, without realizing it, his real life had started in a tiny kitchen with a girl in a cotton dress who smiled at him without asking for anything. "I already have everything I need," he said quietly. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Her? She's nothing. A charity case." Something inside Alexander snapped. "Don't you ever speak about her that way," he growled, his voice low and lethal. Emma is more real, more kind, and more alive than anyone I've ever known, including you." For a heartbeat, Vanessa looked genuinely stunned. Then she huffed, spun on her heel, and marched back to her car. The black vehicle peeled away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. Alexander didn't spare it a second glance. He was already running, down the gravel path, past the rose garden, through the fields where he knew she would be. His heart pounded, not from exertion, but from fear. Fear that he was too late. Fear that he had let the only thing that ever truly mattered slip through his fingers. He spotted her near the old oak tree, sitting on the grass with her arms wrapped around her knees, her head bowed. Without thinking, he dropped to his knees before her. "Emma," he said, breathless. "Look at me." She raised her head, and the pain in her tear-streaked face broke him. "I don't care about that world," he said fiercely. "I don't care about anything but you." Emma stared at him, stunned. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking, "let me prove it to you." And for the first time since they had met, Alexander didn't look like a CEO or a man built from stone. He looked like a man stripped bare, terrified and desperate, holding out his heart for her to take or break. Emma stared at Alexander, her mind reeling. The powerful, proud man, who had once barely looked at her, was now kneeling in the grass, eyes shining with a raw, aching vulnerability she had never thought to see. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why now? Why me?" Alexander reached for her hands, hesitantly, as if afraid she might pull away. And when she didn't, he laced their fingers together with a tenderness that made her heart break anew. "Because you're the first person who ever saw me," he said hoarsely. "Not the company, not the title, just me." He squeezed her hands, grounding himself. "And you didn't ask for anything. You just gave. Your kindness, your patience, your smile. You gave me a home without even trying." Emma's throat tightened painfully. She had built walls too, carefully protecting herself from the impossible hope that he might ever care. Now he was tearing them down with every broken, beautiful word. "I'm not good at this," Alexander admitted, his forehead dropping to press against her knuckles. "I don't know how to be the man you deserve, but if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, not from sadness, but from overwhelming, trembling joy. Slowly, she slipped her fingers under his chin, lifting his face to hers. His blue-grey eyes searched hers, afraid to hope. "You're already enough," she whispered. A sharp breath escaped him, half a sob, half a laugh. And before either of them could think, Alexander pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. Emma clung to him, feeling the thundering beat of his heart, the way his whole body shook with the intensity of the moment. There were no more walls, no more masks, just two souls, fragile and brave, finally finding each other in the open. As the wind rustled the leaves around them, Alexander pressed a kiss to her hair, a promise without words, and Emma closed her eyes, letting herself believe in them. In this, in a love neither of them had seen coming, but now neither of them could imagine living without. The days that followed were unlike anything either of them had ever known. It was not the grand, sweeping romance of fairy tales. It was something quieter, deeper, a love built in small moments, shared breakfasts, soft smiles across the garden, stolen touches in the hallway. But it wasn't always easy. Alexander, used to commanding boardrooms and making snap decisions, struggled with the slow, simple rhythms of Emma's world. He burned the toast the first morning he tried to surprise her with breakfast. He nearly flooded the kitchen trying to fix a leaky faucet, refusing to call for help because he wanted to do it himself. Emma, in turn, found herself overwhelmed by the little luxuries he took for granted. The endless rooms of the estate, the formal dinners where she didn't know which fork to use, the polite nods of the staff who had once bowed only to powerful CEOs, not village girls in cotton dresses. Sometimes they laughed about it, sometimes they didn't. One evening, after an awkward dinner party where Emma had felt completely out of place among Alexander's old business associates, she sat on the back porch, hugging her knees to her chest, staring up at the stars. Alexander found her there, silent and small under the vast sky. Without a word, he sat beside her, pulling her into his side. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "I keep forgetting. My world is not your world. I don't ever want to force you into it." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, sighing. "I want to be part of your life, Alexander. I just need time to find my place in it." He turned, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Take all the time you need," he murmured, "as long as you stay." And there, under the stars, with the scent of roses in the air and his arms wrapped around her, Emma realized something. It didn't matter where they came from. It didn't matter how different their worlds had been. What mattered was that they were building something new, together, one imperfect, beautiful step at a time. The next morning brought a soft, golden sunrise that spilled over the fields, bathing the estate in a warm glow. Alexander and Emma sat together at the kitchen table. No suits, no formalities, just two people wrapped in the quiet comfort of belonging. Emma stirred her tea, thoughtful. Alexander watched her, sensing the weight behind her silence. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently. Emma hesitated, then set her cup down. "I've been thinking," she began slowly. "I know I'll never fit into that high society life you once had, and maybe that's not a bad thing." Alexander reached across the table, taking her hand. "I don't want that life anymore," he said simply. Emma smiled shyly, squeezing his fingers. "Then maybe we could build something new, together." Alexander's heart gave a powerful thud. "Tell me," he said, "what do you see?" Emma's eyes lit up, and for the first time, she spoke of her dreams. "I want a life that's real," she said. "A home filled with love. A place where people come not because of your last name, but because they feel welcome. Maybe a small farm, a real garden, a place where we can grow something with our hands, not just chase numbers on a screen." Alexander listened, every word sinking deep into his soul. "And maybe someday," she added, cheeks colouring faintly, "children running through the fields." The image pierced him with a sweetness he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. Children, a home, a future that wasn't built on contracts or expectations, but on laughter, hope, and love. Alexander leaned forward, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Let's build it, Emma," he whispered. "All of it. Together." Her eyes shimmered with tears, but this time they were tears of happiness. And as they sat there, planning a future that neither had dared dream of before, a quiet certainty blossomed between them. They were no longer two people from different worlds. They were one world now, a world of their own making. The very next week, Alexander and Emma set their plan into motion. It started with long walks around the estate, hand in hand, imagining what could be. The once imposing mansion, with its grand halls and endless empty rooms, suddenly seemed too cold, too detached for the life they dreamed of. One afternoon, as they wandered toward the far end of the property, Emma spotted it, an old forgotten stone cottage, tucked between a grove of ancient oak trees. The roof sagged slightly, and wild vines crept along its crumbling walls. But when Emma stepped through the broken doorway, she gasped. Inside, despite the dust and decay, there was something undeniably charming. A wide hearth, wooden beams overhead, windows that framed the fields like paintings. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. This, Emma breathed, spinning slowly in the center of the room. This could be home. Alexander watched her, a soft smile playing at his lips. Then we'll make it so, he said. That very evening, they sat at the kitchen table again, rolling out sketches and notes. Alexander handled the structural plans, calculating how to reinforce the beams, replace the roof, bring water and electricity. Emma dreamed aloud about curtains fluttering in the summer breeze, fresh bread baking in the oven, wildflowers in jars on the windowsills. For once, Alexander wasn't thinking about profit margins or efficiency. He was thinking about sunlit mornings with Emma beside him. He was thinking about building something that no amount of money could ever buy. Brick by brick, dream by dream, they began laying the first stones of their new life. Not as a CEO and a village girl, but as partners, as family, as two hearts that had finally found their true home. In each other. Renovating the old cottage turned out to be more challenging and much more fun than either of them had expected. Alexander, who was used to boardrooms and polished marble floors, found himself knee-deep in sawdust, learning how to wield a hammer properly under Emma's amused guidance. "You're holding it like it's a fountain pen," Emma teased one afternoon, laughing as he awkwardly swung the hammer and barely tapped the nail. Alexander gave her a mock glare, then handed her the hammer. "Show me then, expert!" Emma took it with a grin, adjusted his grip, and guided his hand in hers. Their bodies brushed, and the warmth of her closeness sent a jolt through Alexander that had nothing to do with construction work. "See?" she said, still smiling up at him. "It's about trusting your strength, not forcing it." Alexander didn't answer. He was too busy marveling at how natural it felt to stand there with her, covered in dust, sunlight filtering through the open windows, laughter hanging in the air. By noon, they were both a mess, hair tousled, faces smudged, clothes streaked with paint and dirt. And yet, Alexander thought she had never looked more beautiful. At one point, trying to lift a heavy beam, Alexander lost his balance and stumbled backward, right into Emma, sending them both crashing into a pile of hay that had been left from long ago. For a moment, they just lay there, breathless and stunned, before bursting into uncontrollable laughter. Emma's cheeks were pink with exertion and joy, her eyes sparkling. Alexander propped himself up on one elbow, gazing down at her, his laughter fading into something softer, something deeper. Without thinking, he brushed a smudge of paint from her cheek, his fingers lingering against her warm skin. Emma's laughter quieted too, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "I love you, Emma," Alexander said, the words slipping out, unplanned but utterly true. Emma's eyes widened, shimmering with tears, but the brightest kind. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice breaking into a joyful smile. In that broken-down cottage, surrounded by dust and dreams, they kissed, a kiss that tasted of sawdust, sunlight, and promises kept. It was messy, it was real, and it was perfect. Weeks passed in a blur of paint, wood shavings, laughter, and stolen kisses. Slowly, the old cottage transformed. Fresh white walls brightened the rooms. The wide hearth roared to life again, crackling with warmth and welcome. Emma planted a wildflower garden outside the kitchen window, while Alexander carefully restored the old oak floors, each plank carrying the marks of both their hands. When the final curtain was hung and the last nail hammered, they stood side by side at the threshold, looking inside. It wasn't grand, it wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. "Welcome home," Alexander said softly, wrapping his arm around Emma's waist. Tears filled her eyes, but she only smiled, laying her head against his shoulder. To celebrate, They decided to host a small gathering, not a corporate gala, not a society event, but a simple, heartfelt evening for the few people who truly mattered. The villagers came bearing baskets of fresh bread, homemade jams, and bundles of wildflowers. The old housekeeper from the estate brought a pie so heavy it needed 2 people to carry it. Liam, Emma's childhood friend, brought his guitar and strummed cheerful tunes under the stars. Emma wore a soft linen dress, her hair braided with tiny blooms, and Alexander had never seen anyone, so breathtaking. Under the twinkle of string lights hung between the trees, Alexander stood before the gathered friends, holding Emma's hand. "Thank you for welcoming me," he said, his voice steady but emotional, "for showing me what matters." He turned to Emma, his gaze filled with something unbreakable. "And thank you," he added, so only she could hear, "for saving me." Emma squeezed his hand, her smile bright through the shimmer of unshed tears. They danced barefoot under the stars that night, 2 souls who had once been lost in different worlds, now twirling together in the center of their very own. It was simple, it was true, and it was everything they had ever wanted. As the last guests drifted away and the stars deepened above them, Emma and Alexander stayed outside, wrapped in a thick blanket, sitting on the porch steps of their new home. The night was quiet, broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets and the soft crackle of the dying bonfire. Alexander held Emma close, her head resting on his chest, his chin atop her hair. His fingers absently traced small circles on her back, slow, gentle, thoughtful. After a long, peaceful silence, Emma tilted her head up to look at him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Alexander hesitated, then smiled, that rare open smile he showed only to her. "Our future," he said. Emma's heart skipped, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. "Tell me," she whispered. He kissed the top of her forehead, lingering there before he spoke. "I used to think happiness meant bigger offices, higher numbers, more power," he murmured. "But now," he pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Now I imagine small hands grabbing mine, laughter filling this house, little voices calling us Mama and Papa." Emma's breath caught, tears immediately brimming in her eyes. "You want that?" she asked, voice trembling. Alexander's hand found hers, intertwining their fingers. "More than anything," he said. A tear slipped down Emma's cheek, and Alexander caught it with his thumb, his touch so reverent it made her heart ache. "I do too," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. They sat there for a long time, dreaming together under the endless sky, of children chasing butterflies through the fields, of bedtime stories by the fire, of a life full of roots, laughter, and love. It wasn't the future either of them had once imagined. It was better. Because it was real. Because it was theirs. And somewhere deep inside, both of them knew. The best chapters of their story were still waiting to be written. The first signs were small. Emma found herself more tired than usual, dozing off in the afternoons with a book slipping from her fingers. Certain smells, fresh paint, roasted onions, suddenly made her wrinkle her nose and hurry outside for air. At first, she brushed it off, blaming the long days of work and the excitement of building their home. But then came the morning when she stood in front of the tiny mirror in the cottage bathroom, a trembling hand pressed over her mouth, her heart racing faster than it ever had before. 2 faint lines stared back at her from the test she held. Tears filled her eyes as she laughed, a soft, breathless, disbelieving sound. She was carrying their child, a piece of both of them, a life born from a love neither of them had seen coming, but now could no longer imagine living without. Emma wanted to tell Alexander immediately, to run to him, to throw her arms around him. But something made her hesitate. She wanted it to be special. That evening, as Alexander returned from repairing part of the fence, he found the kitchen bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. Emma was there, waiting, wearing one of her simple linen dresses, her hands nervously folded in front of her. On the small dining table sat a pie. Not just any pie, but the same apple pie she had been eating the day they first met under the apple tree. And beside it, a tiny pair of knitted baby booties. Alexander froze, staring, his mind racing to understand. Emma's voice trembled as she spoke. "You once said you wanted small hands grabbing yours," she whispered. "I think it's happening sooner than we thought." For a long moment, Alexander didn't move. Then, in one breathless rush, he crossed the room, scooping her into his arms, spinning her in a circle as Emma laughed and cried all at once. He set her down carefully, cupping her face in his hands, his forehead resting against hers. "You," he said, his voice raw with emotion, "you've given me everything I never knew I needed." Tears shimmered in his eyes, the powerful, invincible Alexander Reed, undone by the tiny miracle growing between them. "I love you," he whispered fiercely. "I love both of you." And there, in their little kitchen, surrounded by warmth, candlelight, and the smell of apples and cinnamon, a new chapter began. A chapter filled with hope, with dreams, and with a love deep enough to last a lifetime. The days that followed were some of the sweetest of their lives. Alexander, once a man who had commanded thousands of employees with unshakable authority, now hovered anxiously around Emma with almost comical care, fetching pillows for her back, carrying even the lightest baskets, insisting she rest every chance she got. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Emma would tease, laughing as she shooed him away when he tried to carry a single loaf of bread. But deep down, she loved it, loved the way he was so fiercely protective, so hopelessly tender. Together, they transformed their cottage once again, this time preparing for the little life soon to join them. Alexander built a small cradle with his own hands, sanding and staining the wood late into the evenings. Emma sewed tiny blankets, their stitches imperfect but full of love. They painted the nursery in soft, warm colours, arguing playfully over whether the walls should have little lambs or stars. In quiet moments, Alexander would rest his hand against Emma's growing belly, feeling the faint, miraculous flutter of life beneath her skin. His eyes would soften, and sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, he would brush a kiss there, whispering promises only the tiny heartbeat could hear. "You'll be so loved," he would murmur, "by both of us." As the seasons shifted and winter's first snow blanketed the fields, Emma and Alexander would sit by the fire, wrapped together in a quilt, dreaming aloud about the life ahead. "I wonder whose eyes they'll have," Emma would say, her voice full of wonder. "Yours, I hope," Alexander would reply, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. Kind, bright, brave. And Emma, smiling through tears, would rest her hand over his, feeling the steady rhythm of new life, of new beginnings, of a love that had already changed them forever. They had built their home. Now they were ready to build their family, with all the tenderness, laughter, and hope they had once thought impossible. The night their child was born, the snow fell in thick, silent flakes, covering the fields in a blanket of white. Inside the warm cottage, the world narrowed to the quiet strength of Emma's breathing and the fierce, unwavering grip of Alexander's hand around hers. Hours later, when the first cries echoed through the little house, Alexander felt his heart crack wide open. The midwife, beaming, placed a tiny, wriggling bundle into Emma's arms. Emma, tears streaming down her cheeks, laughed, a soft, awed sound. and Alexander thought he had never seen anything so beautiful. "It's a girl," Emma whispered, her voice full of wonder. Alexander sank to his knees beside the bed, his fingers trembling as he reached out to gently touch the baby's impossibly small hand. The tiny fingers curled instinctively around his, holding him with a grip fiercer than any contract, any vow. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His throat was too tight, his heart too full. "She's perfect," he managed at last, voice breaking. Emma smiled down at him, the very picture of love and grace, their daughter cradled safely against her. "We should name her," she said softly. Alexander leaned close, brushing a kiss to Emma's forehead, then to the baby's downy head. "Hope," he said, his voice sure, "because that's what you gave me. That's what she is." Emma's smile grew, radiant through her tears. "Hope," she echoed, cradling their daughter closer. That night, as the fire crackled low and the snow drifted quietly against the windows, Alexander and Emma sat together, a family now, wrapped in each other's arms, their tiny daughter sleeping peacefully between them. Alexander pressed a kiss to Emma's temple, his voice a soft vow against her skin. "I promise," he whispered, "to love you both for all the days of my life, through every season, through every storm, no matter what comes." Emma tilted her face to his, tears shimmering in her eyes, and kissed him with all the love she held inside. And there, in their small, imperfect, perfect home, surrounded by everything they had once thought impossible, a new life truly began. It wasn't the life Alexander Reed had once planned. It was something better. It was real. It was messy. It was beautiful. And it was forever. Thank you for joining this beautiful story of unexpected love. If this tale touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more romantic journeys. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories are the ones we never see coming.